I'm joined by quite a power pack panel of Gurpreet, Parag, and Deepa. Let me just quickly introduce the panelists before we go on to today's topic. Um, Parag is the Regional Director, Training and Quality at Emeritus. He has 16 years of experience across different segments and geographies. He's been a leading professional in L&D for more than 11 years, overseeing several functions like LMS implementation, talent management, performance management, and employee engagement, among others. Um, Gurpreet is the global head HR shared services at Sterlite Technologies Limited. Gurpreet has more than 15 years of experience across different industries. He has led teams in several domains like talent acquisition, employee engagement, and HR shared services. His passion is really towards automating and digitizing HR processes through advanced systems and techniques. Deepa, who's here with us, is a partner at Flint Rock Consulting. She's a talent professional with interest and expertise in organizational learning and change, talent analytics technology. Her career of 2 decades has consisted of industry experience in Indian and multinational companies and roles in sales, human resources, organization development, talent analytics, and learning. So, welcome once again to the webinar. We have more than 134 attendees with us and increasing. So, yes, the new normal is here and not quite as expected. We no longer live in the familiar routine of the pre pandemic era. Bewilderment and turmoil are mainstay and front and center of our lives. And if I was to draw a very loose simile, if one remembers the terrorist attacks of 9 by 11 and how that really transformed the airlines industry, the pandemic in that sense has really transformed the world and the future of work, right? And the way the event there exposed the gaps in the systems, what we are seeing and experiencing today, which is shaped by and the new reality shaped by the Great Resignation and quiet quitting, moonlighting, and there is a new thing that emerges every day. Has really brought to center some of the gaps and brokenness in our system currently. So we thought of getting some of the bright minds from our HR fraternity to discuss, if there is a link that is missing. Yeah. There was a study conducted by Gallup sometime towards the end of the second quarter this year. And what they found was that the number of people, while who are actively engaged, still continues to be at 32%. The number of actively disengaged people has increased to 18%. So the quiet quitters is actually not so quiet and a loud majority of 50% at workplace now. So would want to hear the experience of our jury member that is this all for real or is it something else? So what's your experience? Gurpreet, would you want to share what has been your experience with the new normal?
Sure, sure. Thank you, Bhakti. Thanks for the wonderful introduction. Good evening, panelists. Good evening, audience. And Karwa Chauth festivities to all those who are celebrating today. And a special warm welcome to those who are working from home. And there's a reason I say this, right? So it's all linked across. So before we get into the nitty-gritties and norms of quiet quitting and moonlighting and the Great Resignation, I mean, let's understand and roll back 2.5 odd years back. Uh, COVID scenario suddenly came as all of us were totally unprepared. What what further went on was a forced work from home, right? And that was a tipping point, I believe, where a lot of people started thinking and looking at life differently. More so when when we were impacted by I think it touched us each one of us in their own unique ways, but somewhere we have lost some near and dear ones in the last 2.5 years, right? And I think that has made us to rethink the purpose of life and the identity. People were really fed up of seeing two walls and a Zoom link like this for almost 2.5 years. This kind of just broke the shell out of it, and that resulted into a lot of so-called new trends coming up. So I think that was the first tipping point to look at. What followed was a signs of fatigue. What followed was a sudden opening of tech economy and a huge gap between supply and demand. And then in that sequence and chronology, we had the Great Resignation coming in, and then the quiet quitters. And of course, the most talked about topic today is moonlighting, which we'll be delving upon and discussing upon more. Yeah, so just getting to understand the background makes the task a bit more easier. Uh, any thoughts from other team panelists? Parag, you want to take this up further?
I'd be happy to, but Deepa, what about you? Would you like to kind of share your thoughts first? I can go last. I don't mind.
Thank you, Parag. That's very kind. So, Bhakti, Gurpreet, we're talking about our experiences, which is moonlighting, quiet quitting, great. Are these just fads? Is this real? Is this really happening? It is happening. Bhakti, some of those data points in Gallup are very, very pertinent. Let me give you 3 points here. One, it's happening across industries. While a lot of the sound bites seem to be coming from the IT industry, all of these trends are prevalent across industries. And we work with clients from across industries. And I'll give you a perspective of what we see with clients and my own personal experience with this trend. So what are we seeing with clients? Some clients are happy, are okay with the moonlighting and some of that's going on. Some clients are saying this is completely not okay. There is a blanket ban on any of these even being discussed internally. Some clients we are saying, some things are okay. For instance, we're okay if you want to go teach in a few colleges and get paid for it. That's okay. That doesn't violate, and that's not a violation according to us. Some of them are saying some roles is okay. If you're not handling data for clients, if you're not handling some licenses and stuff, we're still okay if you go and do something else, do fundraising, run an NGO. All of these are okay. So the clients are split down the middle. Some are okay with it and some are not okay with it. And when I was trying to make sense of it, I couldn't help but think of a time when I experienced moonlighting. I'm not sure if sharing it on a public platform is a good thing to do, but this was a time when I moonlighted in my career. And this was a few years ago. I was in my day job, the HR for a business unit. I used to manage that business unit, but I had done that role for a few years. It was not giving me any new stretch or challenge or learning. I wasn't really satisfied with what I was doing there. And I said, okay. And there's so many great things happening in the world of HR. I was interested in agile. I was interested in blockchain. I was interested in analytics. And my day job was just not satisfying me. So I went ahead and found projects with other teams within the same company. I worked with another team which was doing a people analytics project that got presented at the highest level. It was very satisfying. It was helping me find the satisfaction I was looking for. My manager was quite unhappy. My manager's like, if you have those extra hours, you might as well put it onto the business unit, right? But the business unit was not challenging me. And then came a real dilemma. My work, my interests got me in touch with a lot of people, and there were two HR fraternity colleagues who said, could you write about blockchain for my website? Could you help me with this analytics project? And that was a real dilemma. I mean, as it is, my manager's not happy. And these are some opportunities that are coming up. So in my head, this is how I resolved it. I said, I'm not using any client confidential information. My work is not suffering. All my deliverables are met, and I'm not getting paid for it. And it's okay to help out in my personal capacity, right? So that's very honestly my experience with moonlighting. And it came from a place of needing job satisfaction, needing to stretch and grow. That's been some of my experiences and my client experiences. Parag.
Wow, fantastic. Thank you so much, Deepa, and thank you so much, Gurpreet. Once again, a very, very good afternoon, good evening to everybody on this webinar today. Very happy to be here. While I talk about moonlighting and quiet quitting, I just want to go right down to the grassroots level. Before I speak about industry trends, before I speak about my personal experiences, I want you to take a minute and just think about, what if for an entire month I had to tell you that you are supposed to be in a closed room and only I can tell you what you're allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do. Just take a minute, just think about it. How would you feel? And that's what, as Gurpreet mentioned, was really the tipping point. We as individuals, we as humans, professionals, like to have the power of choice. So we definitely like to work from the comfort of our home. But then if you tell me that I have to work only from home, beyond the point of time, I start getting restless. I start getting impatient. I long to go back to work and I want to meet my colleagues, right? I like that power of choice. But then when I was told to work from home, so did all of us. We were forced to work from the confines of our house. For for some people, it was a few months. For some people, it was over a year. And for a large population, I know it was over 2 years, right? So the that is one of the biggest things. Now, when you're working from home, when you have so much of free time to yourself, there's one of two things that you'd want to do. You'd want to use your faculties in two different ways. Maybe in a way where you can enhance your skills and your faculties, or by a method that gets you more monetary benefits. You'd be very surprised to know that moonlighting isn't new, right? Go back to the days when you were studying. Have you seen your teachers, right? They used to teach in school in the day and they take tuitions in the evening, right? See, I can see Gurpreet nodding. So you know of that experience. You know of doctors who used to work in hospitals, but then they also used to run their own private practice, right? So moonlighting has been there all throughout. Why is it now such a big debate, right? And why is one section of the society being called out? Right? There are many reasons for that, and we can discuss those reasons as well. But then, for very recently, moonlighting is being called out as an ethical issue, saying that you are bound to work full time for me as a company, as an organization. You've signed an agreement to that fact, and that is the reason why you cannot use your faculties and your skills for the development or the benefit of another organization. That is the larger conflict that's coming up. But I don't want to be digressing, but I've seen this in my own professional space as well. So for a long time, when I was in the L&D faculty, I used to travel to various conferences, right? I used to host a lot of events, right? This was part of my personal development because our corporate roles, don't allow us the opportunity to enhance our faculties, our skills, right? And come up to the industry trend. Not necessarily every time, but like Deepa was saying, in your own professional capacity, if you want to come up to what trends the industry has to offer, if you want to scale up yourself as a professional, um, and of course, yes, most importantly, if there's no monetary benefit involved there, is there a harm in moonlighting? That's the thought I want to leave you all with at this point of time. Bhakti, back to you.
Yes, and I think one of the things, that the pandemic greatly brought to the fore was, how people view themselves and how they have disjointed their identities from the work identities, right? And that is what pandemic did to a lot of us. It made us reassess, our priorities and how we viewed self, and it fundamentally changed the relationship of the work and the worker, right, and employee and the employer. And it also gave rise to a new segment of workforce, the gig workers, which are now so ubiquitous, right? We have 100 million plus online content creators alone, right? And that is just one segment of gig workforce. These are some of the things in my view that have given rise to this phenomena. But what do you all think? What could be the possible reasons, that we're witnessing some of these things? So before we come to the panelists, I thought we'll go back to the audience. We now have more than 250 folks who are there with us on this webinar. We have a small poll coming up. We would want to hear from our audience about what do you all think could be the reasons behind this, before we have our panelists discussing.
While the participants are voting, Parag, you got me thinking on whether this kind of a session is a moonlighting for me or not. Because I'm taking this session during the office hours and trying to upscale and learn something and deliver a session. So yeah, very interesting topic. Love to further deep dive on this.
Absolutely, yes. Absolutely, yes. In fact, what Bhakti just said about the generational shift also has really got me thinking. And this is something that we're realizing at work as well. So maybe I'll continue after our audience has finished voting. But Bhakti, you should let the host and the panelists also vote.
She's letting you vote by speaking.
That's not my choice. Sorry, that's the limitation of the technology that we all live
Very
in.
interesting
No, no, I'm
question
just
on my
kidding.
screen.
So
I'm
the
just
verdict
kidding.
is out loud and clear. So maybe I think the topic, we'll have to change it from moonlighting and great resignation to, does hybrid and remote working work, to versus should we be in office? Because people tend to be saying that all of this seems to be happening because people are working remotely. And the age old debate in HR that just pay people and everything else will be taken care of. So people also feel that inadequate pay is one of the things. So what is your experience, guys? Is it all driven by the fact that our workplace is literally transformed from our work desks to our bedrooms and kitchens and halls becoming our next workplaces? Do you all really feel that remote working has had an impact to the connect and the sense of belongingness an employee would have had to the workplace?
If I had to take that, Bhakti, it would be a yes and a no, right? And the reason I say that is there are two broad factors at play here. And one of the factors we must recognize is that moonlighting, quiet quitting, and the great resignation wave are all interconnected. The job satisfaction that we do not experience, the lack of connection that we feel with the work we are doing, the lack of team sense of being cared for that we feel at the workplace, all of those contribute towards job satisfaction, which in turn becomes a precursor for quiet quitting or moonlighting. And there is a research published as far back as 1977, which says that moonlighting is the first step towards resignation. You start from there and you go. So these three trends are really interconnected and they influence each other. And that research again points you to the word that these trends are not new. The first time the word moonlighting was used was in 1800s. And it was used because most of us at that time had jobs which we did during the day. And if we took up another job, it happened at the night under the moon. And that's how that term moonlighting even came up, right? So it's not something new. It's a phenomena that we have lived with. Gallup scores that you were talking about, Gallup has been measuring this disengagement for decades now. And they clearly say that anybody who's either not engaged or disengaged, who are in the middle are your quiet quitters. And that's the group that you need to work to. And that's again something that they measured for decades. So this is not new. Second, these are interconnected. And what's really happening is it's a function of the societal trends. Think about it. We're talking ethical issues, but the entire industry is divided down to the middle. Suddenly, it's okay. It's not completely like a black mark. People are saying moonlighting is okay. It's an idea whose time has come. Society and the gig workforce is considered as a precursor to moonlighting. We got comfortable with the gig workforce by the 2010s. The specialist contract staff are paid brilliantly. And that was the precursor to the moonlighting in a way of sorts. So we don't look down upon it in the society. Technology is allowing us to do this far more easily. It doesn't restrict us anymore. So it's an idea whose time has come. And COVID has clearly untethered us from the workforce. It's allowed us to think, am I going to be just defined by my role or not? Maybe not. And many of us have rethought our priorities. So that's how I would see the interconnection and the societal factors at play.
So I'll just add to what Deepa is saying, So when I look at the workforce, I look at there are three larger demographics that I'm looking at. So we have maybe 17-18% of baby boomers who still working, The largest population, the workforce population, are the millennials today. But then what is clearly making a dent in the workforce population is the Gen Zs and the Gen Alphas today. And we all know that Gen Z and Gen Alpha are very, very gig focused, so much so that they're comfortable with a gig economy. That's one factor. Then comes the key word here is the word influencer. See, growing up, I had two influencers in my life, right? Very proud to say my mother, my grandmother, right? But today, I am surrounded by, I can't even count, right? And they allow me to imagine a lifestyle that I've only probably dreamt of. But their experiences want me to experience the same lifestyle, right? So I need to make amends for that lifestyle as well. That's the second thing. Then comes the third aspect, which is your socio-economic cultural influences, right? And I'll state a very funny example that happened to me today, just a few hours back. So, we got somebody who works at our place, a house help. Her son comes to me and he says, if you can pick up an Apple iPhone 14 for me, I will give you back the money in 6 equal monthly installments. But all I need is for you to order it for me from Amazon or Flipkart or wherever the best deal is. Now, that what took me aback was the fact that a young boy, a 16-year-old boy, feels the need to be upgraded to the latest technological gadget, right? That probably costs around ₹1,00,000. What's more interesting is that he is prepared to create the means to pay for the gadget as well, right? So if I look at my workforce, and if I look at all three of these aspects that I've said, right? What happens is that my growing workforce, which is open to a gig economy, has now realized that they don't need to be committed to one workplace for all 22 working days or 25 working days of the month, because they can work remotely. And I've known people who worked across the world in the last 2.5, 3 years. And they've worked a constant job, they've worked multiple jobs, which is okay with them as long as it meets their three basic social needs and familial needs. They're happy that way. So is it a fad? Not really. Is it here to stay? Definitely. Then what's the problem? The problem is, for the largest part of our workforce, people who have been working 20 years, 25 years, 30 years, they haven't experienced this in a large wave. So my take is that that will take some more acclimatization, some more getting used to the fact that this particular set of people might want to, utilize their skills and their efforts elsewhere as well. Okay? And that's why this is actually a growing trend, or that's why It's being called out today. People are panicking about it. As much as they're seeing it happening, the panic also comes from that angle. But Gurpreet, sorry.
No, no, so very well said. Couldn't have agreed more, Deepa and Parag. I think uh, while the trends are there and they are here to stay, I'm just reflecting, right? At the end of the day, it's a contractual agreement or an association with the company defined by certain rules and regulations. If in case you are able to abide by them, like, so you're also having other associations, right? Your marriage is also kind of a contract, but that does not stop you from meeting your friends and having your own personal space and life, right? If I give a closest corollary here, so I think you have to embrace it. Of course, as rightly said by Deepa and echoing Parag, I think you'll have to define basis your industry, basis your role, basis what you're doing. Are you working in a very, very confidential IP kind of an environment, which requires a lot of data security? Are you working in, are there certain conflicting ways, on non-poaching, non-confidentiality? And if those aspects are met, and if the companies are able to clearly define and call out, right, what is okay and what is not okay, what is okay to be qualified as a gig or working outside or not, I think the picture would be a lot more clearer here. Definitely working which is conflicting with the interest of the company, definitely a no-no. But for all other scenarios, so be it. It could be pro bono, it could be attracting some money. That's fine. You have to make the picture very, very clearer to the employees. I think the second aspect, which we I would have to reflect a bit more, is also on quiet quitters, because that's a very dangerous trend, right? You may have a moonlighter who is equally actively engaged but still doing some assignments outside the workspace. However, quiet quitters are the ones who are clearly defined as on the level of disengaged or getting into actively disengaged zone, right? So you have to really understand this space of people also very well and see how you can address them. This clearly means that you have been given A, B, C task. You just do that like a horse who's running a race and don't look anything beyond that. And that is a dangerous trend, right? Because if each one of us really goes that extra mile, right? If I do 101 or 110% of the task assigned, and imagine all the colleagues and team members doing that, that by default lifts the entire culture, the entire productivity of the company. So by default, the moonlighting, the great resignation will diminish. So I believe that all are interconnected. Uh, when we say quiet quitters, I think more or less it is also about having not so good bosses, then not so good employers, right? So you have to understand the means and ways of how do you really get the engagement quotient or that zinc and that motivation back into the workforce to help this block grow and build better.
Yeah, and interestingly, the same study, Gurpreet, the Gallup study also mentioned that engagement levels of the managers are at an all-time low. So this entire resignation is adding to the fatigue and the burnout for the managers. And in that sense, it also says that maybe the starting point to maybe address all of this is to really look at the most important person in the whole equation, is to look at how actively engaged are our managers, are they skilled enough to sort of manage the roles that they're managing, and especially in the new era of hybrid working, have we enabled them right to manage this new order of work. So to that, maybe let's.
Bhakti, if I could just come in for a minute here. And I was listening to Gurpreet and thinking of some of the factors that impact it. And Gurpreet was talking about, if everybody raises the productivity level, if everybody puts in that 10% extra, then just think of where the company will go. And I completely agree, right? I completely agree that it's going to elevate the performance of the company. But if you flip that equation and if you just consider it from the other side, think of the jobs that our parents held, right? 9 to 5. And when they finished, they went home. There was a gap. The company couldn't reach you. Technology didn't allow us to be reached. And today, thanks to technology, it's a 24/7 job. And companies are somewhere assuming that they have control over the 24 hours of the employee. They expect the employee to put in those 24 hours. If you respond late at the night, it's considered far more committed and motivated. And think of COVID that Parag was talking about. You're closed in a room. That accelerated this feeling that this is 24/7. This is forever. They're taking every waking minute of my life. And at some point, this is a pushback from the employees to draw a few boundaries, saying, you know what, I will give you my best hours. But beyond that, I want my space. You are my employer, but you're not my identity. I will do my best, but you don't have my 24 hours. And there is a certain redrawing of the boundary which is happening here. These trends are a reflection of the redrawing. I'm just playing it from the other employee's perspective out, right? And the second trend, which COVID kind of helped again accelerate, it was always there. It's been studied in 1977 about boundarylessness. We want to be one person everywhere. We want to carry a seamless experience. But companies are bucketing us, saying, oh, you have to take care of something, take a sabbatical, take a leave. Otherwise, you have to be here. You have to be closed here, right? So that boundarylessness also was getting impacted. COVID just made it too overwhelming for all of us. 24/7, all the time. And there is a certain pushback, which these are just symptoms of. And that's the other way that I would just place.
In fact, I'd just like to add just one more point to what Deepa just said. It was very surprising, very funny when, the entire economy started opening up after the initial COVID hit. And, companies started reconducting interviews for hiring. With every person I would speak to, they'd say, you know what? In the COVID phase, I was 165% more productive. In the COVID space, we achieved over 220% of what we were expected to achieve. So what used to amuse me is that, is COVID important for you to prove your effectiveness to the company, right? Or and also rightly, as Deepa said, my office life and my personal life was blurred. And this is an example that a lot of working professionals here on this discussion will also, kind of relate to. I didn't know when I was finishing work and when I was starting life, right? And that has led very importantly to the over two-thirds of your workforce being actively disengaged today, including your managers.
Yes. So maybe let's look at, what are possible ways in which we could combat this. So we have another poll, and looking at the new ways of working, we'll also again crowdsource ideas from the audience on this. So yes, the poll is up on your screen.
So EVP stands for Employee Value Proposition. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right.
There should be an option of all of the above.
I see a very interesting common thread in all these four options as well. So,
True.
Yeah. Okay. So there is, yeah, can you share the results as well? So there is a thumping majority again here, and people have shared that. Sorry, it's not the money, honey, but it's actually the opportunities to grow and learn within the organization. Amongst others, sure, it cannot be just one size fit all kind of a solution, but amongst equals, probably organization should focus on how their people are growing and learning within the ecosystem. And people are also saying that, what is it that we have to offer to our employees needs to have a relook, right? Maybe the world around us has changed, preferences have changed. Yeah. So thank you, everyone. And here at ID5 there is a running joke. So before Deepa shared that the term moonlighting was first time coined or used in the 1800s. I've been always told that we are the ones who invented this word, because incidentally I have a team member called as Chandni, to whom I had given an internal gig of another role. Yeah, and rather not moonlighting, but I would call it as daylighting. And because it's Chandni, they said yes, we invented the term moonlighting. But jokes apart, creating internal gigs, and possibly that is one of the ways in which we feel that how you can give a different kind of exposure and experience to our people was one of the ways we thought we could really look at tackling this differently. So provide to them what they seek internally. But in your experience, Deepa, of having worked with different kinds of organizations, how do you, what have you worked with your clients on, on dealing with some of these things?
Thank you, Bhakti. And uh, two things before I get into how we worked with clients on some of this, right? One is just an acceptance that moonlighting and some of this is an idea whose time has come, and we have to engage with it. We have to find ways to really work with it. And in the first poll that you kind of ran, it was interesting to see what the audience was saying. They said remote work is the cause for moonlighting and quiet quitting and all of that. And remote work was the biggest contributor to it. And that kind of reminded me of the stand-up comedian who said it very well. She said, after the television remote was introduced, we never walked to the TV again to change channels. We never did. So the remote work is here to stay. In some sense, look at all the companies who are calling back employees to office. Nobody is saying all 5 days a week. Most of these companies are saying 2 days, 3 days, please come in when you can, right? So the remote work is here to stay, or hybrid work is here to stay. So if that is the greatest cause of this, and if it is here to stay, then what can companies do to work with some of these trends is really how I would look at it. And I have 3 points, 3 suggestions, 3 recommendations that I can pull out for companies from this. And one of the things that we advise companies is to reimagine their contracts with the employees. And I just don't mean the legal contract. I don't mean just the piece of paper. I mean the psychological contracts that you have with employees. Do they feel connected towards what they're working on? Do they see that it is connected to a higher purpose? Do they see the impact of what they're creating? Or do they see it as a bunch of tasks which they can do somewhere else for more money? Right? The psychological contract of what they're working on is something that companies will have to reimagine. The second one is the social contract, which is, do your employees feel like they belong to a team? Do they feel like they're cared for? And this was the research published in 1994 by Konotsky. And he said the employee behavior is a response to what he or she experiences in the workplace. It's a reciprocity. So if they experience care and belongingness, they will respond with commitment. So the social contract that you have with employees becomes extremely important. And along the reimagining of the contracts is, how do you reimagine the office? If companies are calling employees back to work to try and curtail moonlighting, saying, you know what, I'll cut your access, I'll make it harder for you to moonlight. Or if they're calling them back to say, it's easier for managers to spot who are the quiet quitters, and those are the wrong reasons. It doesn't help in the long run to take that approach. Instead, companies will have to reimagine their office itself. And how can the infrastructure help employees do their work better? Can the office become a place for celebration, milestones, brainstormings? All of those are some things that the companies could do. So that's one, reimagining of the contracts that you have with employees. The second one that companies should consider, must consider, I'd go so far as to saying, is to allow for these conversations within the company. Don't close the door. Don't say moonlighting is bad. Don't say quiet quitting. don't want you here. Don't close the door. A love for conversations. I love them. Like when I went to my manager who said, why can't you put it on the job? A love for conversations, which will then create a space for you to enrich their jobs. Find out where it's not working. Don't just blanket say black and white. And those conversations will allow employees to figure out, okay, how can I find satisfaction? How can I find my calling? How can I contribute better? So if you don't stonewall and allow conversations, that's going to be a big one for companies to consider. And the last point that I would offer for companies is that they will have to consider reskilling their managers and leaders. The reason I say that is if hybrid work is here to stay, then the way the managers and leaders think and their mindsets will have to undergo a shift. We have a generation of leaders who are used to getting work done by monitoring people who are in front of them. And suddenly the mindset is, if they're not in front of me, they're not working, or they're working for someone else. Or even the mindset of, if they're not coming into office every day, they're not very committed to their job. So those mindsets have to shift. And then managers and leaders have to be extremely well enabled on communicating better. The reason I say this is the office made it easier for us to fill up the blanks. You had a policy document, but we would make meaning by saying, acha, this is allowed. Okay, this can be done here. This is done this way here. So each of us would fill up the blanks of the policy by looking at what was happening around us. Right? We would go to a town hall, we would go to an all hands meet, and the leader would throw data and perspectives at us. And when we were walking out in smaller groups, we would have conversations. We would fill up the blanks of our understanding like that. And we are not going to be in office at the same time all the time ever again, which means that the filling up the blanks will get harder for employees. They won't connect the dots well. So managers and leaders will have to go out of the way to communicate better. So those are my 3 suggestions. Reimagine your contracts, psychological, social, the workplace. Have conversations, encourage conversations so that you can enrich the employee's role. Clearly, learning and growth was the top thing that the participants asked for. And the last one is about skilling your managers and leaders on holding and carrying teams in this new world of work far better. That's the 3.
Thanks, Deepa. So, Gurpreet, I know you would also be looking at, the entire experience of the employee as well. So, what has been your experience, in having to manage differently, the expectations of the employee and how that is delivered at workplace?
Sure. Thank you so much. And Deepa has so very well articulated this and shared her thoughts. I think just adding on to what Deepa said, I think at STL we are continuously striving to become a learning and listening organization, right? And there's a difference between hearing and listening, right? So it's very important that we listen and then further act on it. So some of the measures which we have taken very seriously is that we've been continuously participating in the Great Place to Work surveys, and a lot of insights come from there. It's a very exhaustive data for us to work upon. At the same time, we are also running our internal employee pulse check survey. So whatever comes across from there becomes a very active feed point for us to work upon. And everything further boils down to the aspects of employee engagement. Uh, if I plot down in terms of, hey, do I consider this as a great place to work versus I'm looking forward to work in this company every day. We want the citizen to be at the highest block of this 2x2 matrix and not get stoned into actively disengaged or prisoners of time or prisoners of work. So I think we are taking the steps and small steps like celebrating and rewarding, which Deepa also said, right? Are we giving enough occasions for us to celebrate? In the reports, are we only seeing the greens, or are we also seeing are we only seeing the reds? I'm sorry, but are we also seeing the greens and acknowledging the efforts and celebrating those in the dashboards and in the reports? So a lot of work is going towards that. We are trying to at the same time leverage on a lot of automation. We are also trying to see, can we ease out the steps for an employee to work better or make them more productive? Can anything be closed within 2 or 3 clicks or 1 or 2 steps, right? So we are leveraging a lot on our bots. We are leveraging a lot on our AI to further improve, self-improve, and see what are the patterns which can be further automated and help remove those hurdles at work. The third trend, I think, which I personally firmly believe, and is that nobody comes to work saying, you know what, I'll work slow today, or I will not work today, or I'll work in three companies, right? Everybody wakes up in the morning with a determination to work well. So I think the onus is also on the leaders to walk the talk, to make them feel appreciated, to make them feel valued for what they do. So I think these are all small steps. There is no one pill for all this, right? Small low hanging fruits, combination of that and some specific interventions on building the right culture along with talent value proposition, if not employee value proposition, I think will go a long way in terms of defining and helping this out. And I think just on moonlighting, as I said, I want to reinitiate. I think it's here to stay. We have to define the rules well so that we cover it, we openly listen out to the thoughts of other people around it, and define a win-win value proposition here.
Thanks, Gurpreet. So, Parag, also since you've had a very deep experience with learning, what are your thoughts on what are some of the new things that the new manager needs to be really skilled up on and looked at from a capability lens?
Okay, so I'll probably just compliment what Deepa and Gurpreet just shared over the last 10 minutes. Uh, Although there's very little that I can really add, but I'd like to break the entire situation into three parts. One is the employer's fears, one is the employee's fears, and the third is the employer-employee partnership. So, what are your employer fears? The employer's fears is loss of productivity, divulging trade secrets, uh, fatigued employees, um unprecedented usage of company resources. This is typically what your employer is worried about, right? What if my trade secrets go to my competitor? What if I'm getting a tired employee to work the next day because my employee's been working for another company? But then, if you look at the other side of the coin, what does my employer really want? The one thing that we, in our eagerness to compliment or celebrate winners, we forget to realize that every single employee wants to succeed. There is no employee who comes to work and says, okay, yeah, I'm okay with Bhakti winning this year's quarterly best performer. Yeah, no problem. Next quarter, let Deepa win it. Yeah, it's okay. I mean, I'm completely okay with it. Nobody says that. Every single employee wants to succeed. The belongingness that you said, Deepa, every single employee wants to show the organization how the work can be done right. Because these are the people who do the same work, maybe 10, 12 hours a day, and they quite possibly know how it can be done best. So they want to belong, they want to participate in the ideation, in the generation of maybe better SOPs. So they also want to be a part of that entire process. Last but not the least, I have not, in the last 15, 16 years, I have not met an employee who does not like to be rewarded or recognized. Right? I have encountered employees who go beyond the wall for you, who who'll go out of the box for you, but there is not a single employee who does not want to be rewarded or recognized, right? So now on one side I have my employer problems, on one side I have my employee expectations. So let me fill in uh, with what are the learning needs really. Is one is first and foremost is your managers should realize that out of sight is not out of mind, right? Second is that a manager should realize that there is has to be a clear definition of what are tasks and expectations. See, if I come to office, am I expected to be at my seat for 8 hours? Do I have a role that needs for me to be at my seat logged in for 8 hours? Some roles do, some roles don't. So is that monitoring required, or is an expectation on the deliverables required? Third, And most important is the definition of what are your work timings versus when do you disconnect. So as a manager, I have to define that for myself, and I have to define that for my team as well. And this should be across the organization, right? This should be built into the culture handbook, right? And this should be values that should be imbibed at each and every level. So make it a practice to celebrate employees. Make it a practice to highlight your talent, right? Make opportunities for people to be involved in critical tasks, critical projects. Let your financial planning not be restricted to just the top layer of your management. Ask your larger team, how much would you want your organization's turnover to be next year, right? We are looking at 1,000 crores. Do you want to plan to take it to 1,200 crores? Now, that could open up quite a can of worms, but is that an experiment somebody wants to take? Is that a poll, a survey where I want to ask my employee whether they want to be a part of my success? That brings my belonging into place, right? So, lastly, just to kind of sum up, all I'll say is that this is a trend that's here to stay. As my generational demographics become more and more skewed towards Gen Z and Gen Alpha, these demands will come up. I remember when you remember Bhakti, when you said that we had parents who worked 30, 35 years in an organization. Today, the average lifespan of an employee in an organization is about 14 months, right? And that's also saying too much. So, if you don't accept it and if you don't work around it, for example, establish a non-compete in your employment contract, right? Because the Supreme Court says that there is nothing against dual employment. So Supreme Court of India says there is nothing against dual employment as long as it's not mentioned in your employee agreement, or you're doing it with the consent of both the employers, right? So establish that exclusivity contract in your work agreement. Ensure that your employees are suitably rewarded and recognized and remunerated, right? Make sure that your employees, especially the disengaged ones, are regularly coached. The power of coaching is something that a lot of companies underutilize. But if you need to move your disengaged employees up the curve, utilize the power of coaching as well, right? But most importantly, involve people in what the company aims to grow towards. But
Yes.
that's it from me, I think. I've spoken quite a bit this time.
No, thank you, Parag. So, yeah, it does sort of boil down to defining the rules of the games very well. And going back to, Gurpreet's example of saying that, even marriage in that sense is a contract, but you have the rules of the games defined very well. And probably it was an HR manager that probably drafted the first prenup ever. But yeah, jokes aside, I would want to open the floor for some questions. So
There's
if
an
you have any,
interesting question there, Bhakti, that I can see in the chat. And that's a really interesting one. It's some anonymous attendee who says, "How do you answer the question? Are you moonlighting if asked by the manager directly?" And that question really made me smile, right? And I was looking at that question and I was thinking, how would I answer that? So if I was asked by my manager saying, "Are you moonlighting or not?" I think I would ask my manager, what makes you think I'm moonlighting? That's where I would start. Is it my deliverables? Is it my commitment? What makes you ask me that? And his answer, her answer would be feedback. If I'm not moonlighting, it's just feedback from where? What is this person thinking? And if I was moonlighting, then his answer would further get me to think, okay, what's the contract that I have signed? Like Parag was mentioning, the Supreme Court doesn't prevent you, but what's the contract you have signed? If my company prevents a blanket moonlighting, or does it only prevent when I am moonlighting with competitors? Depending on that, I would then go ahead and choose. But that would be my response. Sorry for jumping in, Bhakti, but that question was really making me smile.
In fact, we do have some more questions, and I'll just maybe, in the interest of time, read out. One is somebody's asked that if the trigger for all these trends is exhaustion, boundarylessness, family priorities, etc., will solutions like motivation, calling for more engagement, etc., be practical? Or do we need to look at flexible work cultures that can accommodate people with different kinds of needs, like people with young kids or having parents for whom they need to care for? So, the question really is that is it time for us to segment, the offerings that we have to our employees and to look at different segments of employees when we are designing really our benefits um, for the employees? So, any thoughts on that?
So I personally feel what today's situation calls for is a mix of both. So a mix of higher engagement as well as a mix of more than a flexible working culture, a more personalized working culture, where at an organizational level, I can define broad categories or broad norms that could accommodate every possible employee situation. Exceptions will always be there. But then if my workforce is higher engaged, if they're better motivated, if they belong better, I think my problems are solved largely.
So, Parag, the next question is also for you. You mentioned about coaching,
Mhm.
but the person's experience here is that they also have got the feedback that coaching is all about gyan. So, how do you look at coaching that it is not viewed as gyan and is really meaningful both to the employee and the organization?
Very interesting question. So, I'm just reading the question once again. Okay, so when you look at coaching, and if if you look at one of the largest coaching organizations in the world, which is MIT HR, uh, they believe that coaching can be effective only when it is relevant and realistic. So I cannot adopt a one shoe fits all policy. I cannot say that if this is applicable to you, this is applicable to you as well. No. What's very important is before I start coaching, there is a process of discovery, right? And this process of discovery has to be individual for each individual being coached. And the solutions or the coaching offered has to be very personalized and bespoke. That is when coaching stops being gyan and coaching becomes a helpful tool for engaging a disengaged employee.
Yes. Another one on moonlighting that somebody's asked, that how can employers remunerate people who moonlight and those who don't differently, considering that one group is completely dedicating their time and effort only to one organization. So should there be a difference in compensation for the ones who moonlight and for the ones who don't?
You're talking of a time, Bhakti, when employees are sharing very honestly and upfront that I am moonlighting and I'm moonlighting for this company, right? I don't think we're there yet. I don't think that level of transparency and conversation is today prevalent in the industry where you're openly sharing, right? Second, most of the moonlight or predominant part of the moonlighting happens in non-competing. So if I'm holding an IT job, I go and teach in colleges, I run NGOs. It's not always competing. That's second. And the third one there is, I think organizations are moving towards outcome-based remuneration more than the number of hours that I'm in the seat-based remuneration. And at the end of the day, it will become about how I create outcomes for my company in my role versus anything else. So that's my 2 cents on that.
Thank you, Deepa, for that wonderful model of outcome-based remuneration. And maybe it's time that we, as the HR fraternity, look at outcome-based remuneration as well and see how can we go about experimenting with that. But thank you all. Thank you, panelists, for this lovely discussion, and thank you all the attendees. For the engaging conversations. I hope all of you all enjoyed the discussion as much as we thoroughly enjoyed our time here. So thank you once again, everyone, and have a great day ahead.
So thank you so much. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Special note, thanks note to Vishwesh, Bhakti, and IDFI team for putting this together. Kudos to you. It went very, very well. And I'm enriched now. I'm going with a lot of takeaways and a lot of things to do back at my workplace. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Deepa, Parag, and the wonderful audience. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Same here.
Gurpreet. Echo
Thanks,
that.
Deepa, and thanks, Gurpreet, for your insights, and thanks, Bhakti, Vishwesh, and team for putting this event together as well. Wonderful to catch up with you all.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Lovely, lovely.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks
Bye.
a lot.